Hi everybody and welcome to this week's episode of Gaffer Gear. This episode's very different for me. It's a gear review. I've done loads of those in the past, but I'm actually reviewing a light today that I actually wouldn't buy, I wouldn't have in my kit. But that's because I'm a gaffer, I use top-end lights. So a light like this, which has a huge color tunable Kelvin range and an RGB mode, for me, in my kit, would have really high color accuracy. It would have really high color tunability and a really high price tag. So in today's episode, I'm looking at a light from a different perspective. I'm remembering back to 26 years ago when I used to work shitty part-time jobs on the weekend to try and earn some money together to get a basic kit of equipment. What would I buy now with that money? What would be great value for money? So today we're going to look at this light. This light costs under 900 Australian dollars. So it's a very affordable light. It's color tunable from 2,800 degrees Kelvin up to 10,000 degrees Kelvin and has an RGB mode. It's also very bright for its price tag. Now, while the light doesn't have super high color rendition, it is more than good enough for your everyday corporate videos. All right, before we get too into the review, I just want to point out a few things. One, I'm not paid to review this. I do have a very good relationship with the company that imports them, but I'm not paid by them, so my views are my own. A couple of things. This is literally the showroom floor model. So I've literally taken this off the showroom floor. So I forgot to get the instruction manual and I forgot to get the little remote control for it. It actually has a remote control that operates it. And the other thing is this will operate off a phone app, but for whatever reason, I can't find the phone app. So I have seen it running off the remote control. I do know it does work and I have seen it running off the phone app. But there are other videos on YouTube that show that. So just Google it, you will find other videos showing the phone app and showing the remote control. Now, let's get into the review. Just because something is cheap doesn't mean that it's good value for money. So is this unit actually good value for money? Well, the answer to that depends on which country you live in. So for example, if you live in America, the cheapest price I could find looking for this online was $700 US. Now for literally a couple of $100 more, we're talking American dollars here, for a couple of $100 more, you could buy this unit instead. This unit has the same CCT range in terms of its whites, 2,800 to 10,000 degrees Kelvin, except this unit has vastly superior color rendering and it also has a plus and minus green. Both units have an RGB mode, except this unit here for $200 more, the RGB mode has tens of thousands more colors. This unit also has a gels library and a special effects library, whereas this unit does not. So for $200 US more, this is probably better value than this unit. I'll let you decide that. However, if you live in Australia, this unit here converted into Australian dollars when it's being imported, it's less than $1,000. So it goes in underneath all of our tax laws, underneath our import tariffs, things like that. Whereas this unit converted to Australian dollars is more than 1,000 Australian dollars. So therefore it is subject to import tariffs, import duties. When you have those things, you've got administration costs and things like that you've got to pay for, plus GST, goods and services tax, has to be added onto it. So that blows the price out. So the difference between this unit and this unit in Australian dollars is actually $600 to $700, which makes this unit way better value for money in Australia than this unit is. Okay, so let's get straight into having a look at it. And straight off the bat, I really am surprised at the build quality. Most lights at this price point, well, they're crap. But this is quite elegantly finished. Okay, the sides are plastic, but it's by no stretch of the imagination flimsy. It's a solid plastic, but pretty much all the rest of it is beautifully machined aluminium. Beautiful curves, elegant, no sharp bits sticking out. It's quite a nice looking unit. I'm quite surprised by that. The switch gear feels quite good, like the on-off switch is nice and solid, doesn't feel like it's going to break, which is usually the case with cheaper lights. All the knobs and adjustments don't feel like they're going to break anytime soon. They feel like they're well made and well crafted. The only thing I don't like is where the power goes in. You can see there it's not the best connection in the world, but you know, it's not going to fall out, and compared to a lot of lights, even lights that are more expensive than this that I own, that's actually not that bad. The usual suspects on a cheap light that are a letdown, number one is the stirrup locks. So I'll just unlock these. One thing I do like is these handles. There is a problem with the handle I'll mention later, but they're quite well placed for tilting and locking the light. And you see the stirrup, even though I've got one locked and one unlocked, it's holding it in place. It's not going to move anytime soon. So that's quite good. The other thing too is the actual stirrup itself. It's not cheap, flimsy Coke can material. It's a strong, solid stirrup. A lot of cheaper lights, the stirrups are really, really bad. The other thing that's usually an indication of a cheap light is the barn doors. So I'm going to show you with the barn doors. I'm going to have this slightly loose, the stirrup, okay? And I'm going to push down on the barn doors, okay? The barn doors don't sag, okay? So on a lot of cheaper lights, the barn doors sag. You can adjust them, but you know, it's a deliberate adjustment. If you clip a gel onto this, to say a diffusion gel to make it a bigger softbox effect, it's not going to sag down like a lot of lights do. It's going to stay in place and hold its shape, which is really, really handy. Now, just getting into barn doors, my opinion of barn doors on a soft light like this, barn doors are a waste of time. Manufacturers put barn doors on because they think it's professional. Let's have a look at what these barn doors do. Let's see how much light these barn doors cut. Yeah, pretty much does next to nothing, right? And that's not a fault of this light. That's just barn doors on a soft light in general. So let's go around, have a look at the front of the unit. Okay, so it's a diffuse soft light, so we've got a diffusion panel in here. Now, one thing I like with this light, other lights I've had in the past that are around this price point, the diffusion panel, you can remove it, and those lights, you pick it up and the diffusion panel just slides out and smashes. That used to happen all the time with my first generation LED lights. These guys have got a little spring push button in here. So you push that little button in, then you can take the panel out. So maybe you want a bit more bullets, you can take the panel out. Put the panel back in, press that button. Now the panel won't slide out. So just little details like that are fantastic. Now let's get into what is really the only, I suppose, negative I have with this light, and that's running it off V-mount batteries. So if you're running it off bigger V-mount batteries like these ones, when you put the first battery on this side, it covers the DMX in and out. So basically, if you're running this thing off batteries, you can't run it off DMX. Okay, so the chances of you doing that are probably pretty slim. It's something that I do, but mind you, when I'm doing that, I've got 6 or 7 lights running simultaneously, usually on an outdoor broadcast or something like that, but probably something that's never going to affect you. So that is a minor sort of inconvenience, probably not a big deal. But what is really a big deal and a bit of a dumb thing with the design, and again, the only thing I find stupid about the design of this thing is when you put the second battery on, this handle is in the way. Okay, so if you're using bigger batteries, you cannot get the second battery on. You can't slide it onto the V-lock plate because this is in the way. Now, I've spoken to the Australian distributor of this product, so if you've bought this off them, or if you're going to buy one off them, they will take this handle off for you if you're going to run it off V-mount. Okay, so let's get into the usability of it. One thing I do like is as soon as you touch an adjustment, the back panel lights up so you can see what's going on. Initially, this panel is very confronting because there's a lot of information there. pretty much after you've used it for a bit, you realize that you pretty much just ignore the bulk of what's written there, and it's pretty straightforward to use. Now, it's got two modes, color temperature mode and hue mode, which is your color mode. Now, to select between the two, the orange button here, the orange knob, you just press that down. So you can see here it says hue, so it's in the color mode, and press it again and it goes back to color temp mode. So there is a little bit of a lag going in between the modes, but it is pretty straightforward to use. So in color mode, which we'll have a look at first, pretty much just read the top of the display. All this stuff here, down here, just ignore it and just read the top of the display. So you've got your brightness, okay? And I did compare this with some other lights. We'll talk about shootouts later. This is quite a bright unit. And the other knob is your color temperature, which adjusts in 50 Kelvin increments. So it's adjustable from 2,800 degrees Kelvin right up to 10,000 degrees Kelvin. Okay, so very, very easy to read display. Again, just ignore everything else apart from the top two values and you're off and running. So very, very, very simple to use. One thing that is interesting with it, I don't know if I like it or don't like it, is let's get it up to 10,000 or as close as we can to 10,000. Okay, we get to 9,990 Kelvin, and if you continue turning, it goes all the way back down to 2,800 degrees Kelvin. I'm not sure if I like that or not. Part of me likes that you get to one end of the knob and you're all the way up to the top, you go to the other end, you're all the way down to the bottom. But I suppose that's what I'm used to. Like, it might be sort of cool to be able to go from blue to yellow with just a little flick of a knob. That could be very, very handy. Let's have a look at the hue mode. So let's press the button to select hue mode, which is the color mode. Okay, now on the display here, there's far too much information. A lot of it's actually pretty useless. So we've got color temperature. The color temperature is actually irrelevant because this light doesn't actually use its white emitter when it's in this mode. So it's only used in the RGB, the red, green, and blue. Okay, now it also has here the red, green, and blue values are in place here. Now you can't adjust those individually, so don't even bother looking at that. That's majorly confusing. Ignore it. So that leaves us with this side of the display. We've got our brightness level. Okay, so that sort of makes sense. That's our intensity. H stands for hue, okay? Now, hue with HSI modes, in standard modes, hue is your color, and that's measured in 360 increments going around the color wheel. So on a standard HSI light, or a light that's running to a HSI standard, 0 hue, which is what the H stands for, is primary red. And 360 is also primary red. However, on this unit, 360 is purple. So it's not running to a standard mode. So that's neither here or there. For the price that you're paying, well, just be grateful that you're getting all these colors, really. The other thing too that's different with this is the saturation. That's what the S stands for. So basically, 99 is pretty much 100. So that's full red. And then you can desaturate it down. So desaturation means removing the color. Now here's where this light is unusual. Let's get it to, okay, so this is 99, so that's full saturation. Now I'm gonna go full desaturation. Now full desaturation is usually standard white, okay, so daylight white. Now when you do it on this unit, it's sort of a bit of a weird blue. It's not a white. And the reason is this actually doesn't use the white emitter, the white LED, to desaturate to. It actually tries to make white out of red, green, and blue only, and that doesn't really work. Okay, so the desaturation isn't the greatest. It desaturates to this weird blue. Now, the other thing that's unusual with it is it doesn't have the full 360-degree color wheel that you usually get in a HSI mode. So if we go around the hue, it actually goes in 5-degree increments. Okay, 5, 10, 15, 20. So it doesn't have the individual degrees in between. So instead of having 360 colors to choose from, which with 100 points of saturation would give you 36,000 colors, This thing actually only has 72 colors with 100 points of saturation, giving you a total of 7,200 unique colors. 7,200 unique colors is quite a playground of colors to have for your backgrounds and things like that, but it's not a full HSI mode. So look, compared to say the lights that I'm using, it is a little bit limiting, but for the price point of this, that's a lot of colors. That's a lot of creativity that you've got at your fingertips. All right, so let's very quickly cover the DMX mode. So I ran some DMX into it, and it took me a little bit of time to figure out that if I want to change between color temperature mode and hue mode, I actually need to do it on the lamp head with the hardware selector here. Okay, so if you select color temperature mode, it's pretty standard. Channel 1 is your dimmer and channel 2 is your color temperature. The response is a little bit slow, and the one thing I did find with this unit is if you try to do a fade to black, this happens. So what a lot of you want to know is how well does the unit perform. So I did a shootout with these other 3 RGBW lights at 2.5 meters with them all set to 5,600 degrees Kelvin. This unit came in at 698 lux, which is not bad for its 180 watt LED engine. Now let's compare that to the Timpani by Luxley. The Timpani came in at 552 lux, which is pretty good considering it's only got a 120 watt LED light engine. Now the Timpani in Australia sells for about 1,600 Australian dollars. Now the winner of the 3 of them in terms of brightness was the ARRI Sky Panel S30. This is the smallest sky panel you can get. It costs a whopping $5,500 and came in at 1,071 lux. Now, out of the 3 of these units, the best performer in terms of its color rendering is actually the Luxley. Okay, so we're getting up to the end of the review now, and you might have noticed I haven't said the name once. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Google actually pronounces it
Yidoblo.
So I really don't have any idea how to pronounce it, so that's why I've been trying to avoid saying it so I don't look totally stupid. Now before we get into the technical side of the review, one thing I forgot to mention, the light actually runs off an external power supply, but this power supply is pretty lightweight, so that's not really a concern. The other thing too with the light I forgot to mention, it weighs in at about 4.5 kilograms, so it's incredibly lightweight, which means you don't need a heavy duty light stand. You can just run it off a normal light stand, and given the situation that you're working in, you might not even necessarily need a shot bag. So if you're looking for something that packs down a nice small kit, 2 of these would probably fit nicely into a bag, 9-10 kilograms. That's something that's very good. Now the rest of this video I'm lighting actually with the Yidoblo, however it's pronounced. So I'm just lighting it the way I imagine a lot of people would be using this light. So I've just got some diffusion put over the front to soften it off a bit more. And the other reason I'm doing that is if you don't understand the technical data that we're about to talk through, what you can do is just have a look at my skin tones and things like that with the rest of this video and compare it to earlier on. Earlier on it was lit with a light that has color rendering scores in excess of 95 plus, so that'll give you a fairly good comparison. All right, so before we get into talking about color scores, what is a good color score in the first place? Because you see a lot of reviews now and they're like, this light scores 99, this light scores 98, anything above 95 is fantastic. You hear stuff like that, and what you got to sort of consider is that genuine advice, or are they trying to sell you the new product that they're selling? So that's the thing you got to consider. Now, I've got a different point of view on what is a good color render score and what's an excellent color render score. I've got a very different point of view to a lot of salespeople. And the difference in my point of view is because I actually am a gaffer and I've been doing this job for 20 years. Now, I was one of the first gaffers in Victoria, in Australia, Victoria, to get a color spectrometer. And that's not because I'm a state-of-the-art guy, it's because I got robbed. All my meters got stolen and I happened to have very good insurance, and the insurance company replaced my crappy old color meter with a color spectrometer. So of course the first thing I did was got the color spectrometer and ran it over all of my existing lights. Now back then, the film and television industry had more fluorescent lights than it did LEDs. And a lot of LED lights were the lights we used as last resort because we could tell something wasn't quite right with them. So the interesting thing was, with the meter, I basically got lights that we were sus of and lights that we were happy with. And the thing I noticed was lights that we were happy with all scored over 85. Lights that we weren't happy with, that were the lights we used as a last resort, they all scored under 85. And the interesting thing back then was no fluorescents scored over a 91, 92. And we'd been using them for decades. So that's how I based my scoring system for me. Anything above 85 is acceptable, is good. Anything above 90 is really good, and anything above 95 is excellent. And basically, I don't care how other people argue about it. If you've got a light that you've been using for a decade and nobody's complained about it and its color score is 85, then it's acceptable really. Okay, so this light has an RGBW light engine. So that means red, green, blue, and white LED emitters. Now, this unit is quite unusual in the way it works. Now, there's nothing unusual about RGBW, but the way this unit generates its whites using that RGBW is quite different. So I'm just going to show you here on my iPad. So basically the white emitters are being used to fill in the gaps between the red, the green, and the blue. This is quite unusual. So basically how this thing, say, changes from tungsten to daylight is basically in tungsten or warm white, it has the red emitter running full blast. And then when you go to daylight, it changes over and uses the blue emitter. Okay, so it's basically changing its red and blue values to adjust the color temperature. Now, there's nothing really wrong with doing this, but usually how lights work is they use their white emitters to get their white balance or their color, and then they use the color emitters, red, green, and blue, to adjust out any hue problems. So basically, this way is a cheaper way of doing it, but it does have side effects. You can't adjust your hue problems as well as you could with another method. Okay, so let's start talking about the stats of the light. Now, if you've never watched a Gaffer Gear before, I don't read the information off the back of the box. I actually spend a solid day testing the units with a color spectrometer. Okay, so I took readings at tungsten, daylight, and in the middle. So let's have a look at tungsten first. Okay, so when we dialed in 3,200 degrees Kelvin on the light, we got 3,120 degrees Kelvin. That's 80 degrees Kelvin out. That's pretty good. Okay, the CRI score is 87.4. Okay, so it's not a brilliant score, but it's okay. The TLCI, Television Lighting Consistency Index score, is 89.83. So not brilliant, but acceptable. Okay, let's have a look at the actual CRI scores. So on the CRI scores, there are only 3 scores that actually got above 90 and one that's level with 90. Some of the rest are pretty low. So one to look at is R9, which is your red. So that scored 71%. So that's why possibly I might be looking a little bit pastier than I did earlier in the video. Okay, so now let's have a look at the color spectrum. So if you're not used to looking at a color spectrum, what does this mean? Well, basically, if you're shooting a scene and you're using only these lights and you're using it at this color balance, that is the maximum amount of leeway your color grader has to play with. That's your color grader's palette. You can see there's not a lot there. There's plenty of red to yellow, but not much of anything else. So if you're using this light to shoot footage that's going to have extensive color grades, this would be a bad choice of light. But if you're not doing that, then that doesn't really matter. Okay, now let's have a look at the color mapping. Okay, so the color mapping reveals that the light is off pure white. So that red line running through the graph is pure white. So let's zoom in and have a closer look. We can see that it's off towards pink. Now let's verify this by having a look at a gels targeting test. Okay, the gels targeting test reveals that you'd need a green gel, and the light spectrometer actually recommends that you go with a Lee brand 246 gel. Now last, let's have a look at the TM30. So the TM30 is a color spectrum test. So it actually takes 99 readings all the way around those black lines that are on the map there. Now those black lines are your reference indicators. So if the light scored 100% perfect score, the red lines would intersect perfectly with those black lines. Okay, so having a look at that, you can see colors that are oversaturated and you can see colors that don't line up. TM30, this thing scored 88.73. So 88.73, that's a good score. It's not great or excellent. But the interesting thing is the color, the RG score, which is the color saturation. The light is actually oversaturating. So it's saturating its colors at 104%. Which means the colors that it's rendering are actually going to pop a little bit more than they naturally would. So 4%, no one's really going to notice. Okay, so let's have a look at our mid-range. So when I dialed in 4,300 degrees Kelvin, the light spat out 4,521. So not incredibly accurate, but close enough the majority of the time. The CRI score is 90.4, which is good. And the TLCI score is 93.45, which is a pretty healthy TLCI score. So that's not too bad at all in the mids. So let's have a look at our individual CRI scores. Now, as you can see, we've got more scores over 90 and more scores in the high 80s. So that's why we've got a better color score overall. Okay, let's have a look at our color vector scores, because our color vector scores really tell us what's going on. The color vector score is 87.5. for color rendering, and the color saturation is 103.2. Now, as you can see by looking at it, quite a few colors are skewed, but they're not too bad. When we have a look at the spectrum analysis in the mid whites, there's quite a bit of detail there, so you can get away with a bit more color grading. Now let's have a look at our color mapping, and our color mapping looks not too bad, but when we push in, you can see that it's still slightly pink. Now, verifying this with a gels targeting test indicates that the light is slightly pink. However, it requires absolutely no gel correction. Now let's have a look at this light set to daylight. When I set it to 5,600 degrees Kelvin, it gave me roughly 6,200 degrees Kelvin. Now the color score, the CRI, was 91.5, and the TLCI score is a very healthy looking 95.7. Now let's have a look at the unique CRI scores. As you can see, there are quite a lot above 80 and about half of them are above 90. However, the color vector score, which really indicates what's going on, suggests that a more accurate score would be 87.9 with a 102% saturation. Now, if you have a look at the graph, you can see there's quite a bit of skewing going on. Some of the colors are not quite right. Color spectrum analysis indicates that you don't have a lot of leeway with this light if you're doing intensive color grading. But looking at the color mapping reveals that the light is very, very close to pure white. Okay, so basically having a look at all that, the color rendering on this light is what I'd call okay. It's not very good or excellent. Now the reason I wouldn't buy this light is because a lot of the work I do actually requires me to have an excellent color rendering light. A good example of that is food photography or close-up work on food products. For example, if the green isn't spot on, then the lettuce might look like it's not fresh. If the red isn't spot on, then the tomatoes might look like they're not fresh. If the pinks aren't right, meat might look like it's undercooked or overcooked, which really upsets a food stylist. So that's why I wouldn't pick these lights, but look, if you're not doing jobs like that, then the color rendering off this light is more than good enough. I'm Andrew Locke, see you on the next episode of Gaffer Gear.